I've had a question about what it means to formally become a Buddhist. Now, I can really only talk about this in a Zen context. I get the sense that there's some spread of sort of meaning and value associated with this across the sort of varying schools of Buddhism. But in terms of Zen, we have a ceremony where you come to formally take the precepts. The precepts are the ethical code of Zen, not killing, not stealing, and so on. Now, people might, immediately sort of take the viewpoint, well, I actually don't kill, I don't steal right now, so does that mean I'm a Buddhist? Well, I'm glad to hear it. The world needs people who aren't going around murdering people, so that's a great sort of establishment. Now, in formally taking the precepts, we have some more dimensions in the mix to think about. So let's have a little think about the structure, first of all. As the precepts have come down to us in our actual school, and they vary a little bit from school to school, you actually have the three refuges. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, which is the Buddha's teaching essentially, and reality, if you like, in the wider sense. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community of practitioners. And in a strict sense, those three refuges are what constitute becoming a Buddhist. Then we have three precepts which are kind of, if you like, fairly global. To cease from evil, to do good, and to do good for others. And then we have the 10 precepts, which people sometimes liken to the 10 commandments, not killing, not stealing, not lying, and so on. And so these together, these 16 precepts, constitute the sort of precepts that we take in the ceremony, where we formally, if you like, engage in practice, become a Buddhist or become a Zen Buddhist in a formal way. Now, you can do all of this within the heart, and primarily taking the precepts is a movement of the heart, a commitment of the heart. However, there's something that happens when you do this in front of the world, when you stand up and say, this is what I commit to do. I think it's a little bit like the difference between living with somebody and getting married to somebody. Something happens when you actually stand up in front of the world and make that commitment. Your daily activities might be absolutely identical. Your living conditions might be exactly the same, but you've made a particular commitment in front of the world, and so that has an effect. Formally taking the precepts has something of that flavor to it. Now, when we kind of commit ourselves to living by the precepts, there are many dimensions. In fact, there are endless dimensions to what this means. Let's just have a little look at some of them right now. So, the precepts mean what they say. So we really do commit to not murdering, to not stealing, to not lying, and so on. They mean what they say. Okay, so that's sort of step one, if you like. Now, they also have a kind of an inner sense as well. When we practice with any degree of seriousness, we come face to face with ourselves. When we do that, not everything that arises is very pretty. Sometimes pretty antisocial impulses, pretty negative impulses can arise. On an internal level, the precepts are like a safety rail. It's like if you've got a wild horse, and the precepts are like a paddock, if you like. Within the paddock, the wild horse can kick and run and snort, and all of that sort of wild horse energy can be kind of allowed to express. And the paddock provides a safe frame for that to happen. Similarly, within you, when you've taken the precepts and made the precepts yours, it paradoxically makes it safe for those more negative dimensions of your existence to be allowed to arise. And it's only as they arise that they actually can be recognized, can be seen, can be known, can be allowed to kind of resolve. So the precepts provide a kind of an inner safety where you absolutely know you're not going to either sort of squash this impulse down again, lock the wild horse in a stable, nor are you going to run with this impulse, nor are you going to murder that person who's driving you up the wall or whatever. Okay? And so, I suppose our analogy would be you're not going to let the wild horse out of the paddock where it can start doing some damage, doing some harm. Another dimension again is the precepts are sometimes interpreted as not so much as a prescription, as a set of rules, but as a description, a description of what enlightened behavior might look like, what a Buddha's behavior might look like. A Buddha will live in such a way that there's no killing, that there's no stealing, lying, and so on. So the precepts can be sort of taken in that sense too. Another dimension again, there are many more. We could spend all day going deeper and deeper. But another dimension again is in the school of koan study that we come from, where we explore spiritual questions or problems as a part of our development. Not necessarily the whole road, but most of our practitioners at least do some measure of study of koans or questions. We actually, at a certain point in our practice, look at the precepts under this kind of head. So, for example, the precept around killing. Now, okay, we take the precept against killing and we don't murder people. Okay, that's a great start. There's more. Okay, maybe we think about animals, not murdering animals. Maybe we think about, avoiding animal products, dairy things, for example. Maybe we, take it further again. Fruit, leaves. What within our food input doesn't have life? All of it has life. Every time you eat, killing is involved. If you refuse to eat, you kill yourself. So within this world, where your very existence involves killing, your very continued life involves killing, a trail of death. What does it mean to keep the killing precept? How can we find resolution within this? How can we find peace within this? So we can study the precepts as koans. And as I say, there are many, many more dimensions. You could view the whole spiritual path as a study of different dimensions of the precepts, utterly authentically. There's just one more dimension of the precepts that I want to mention in terms of, considering formally becoming a Buddhist, becoming a Zen Buddhist particularly. And that's what's called in Japanese Sangai. So this term Sangai, the earliest mention I know of it goes back to Enno, the great 6th ancestor of Zen in China. And he discusses it under 2 heads, San and Ge. Chinese pronunciation is a little bit different. I don't know Chinese. I'm not going to attempt to mangle the language. I'm mangled Japanese enough already. So, Sangai. San refers to kind of like acknowledgement of past stuff that you've done, past behaviors, things that you've done that have perhaps been a little bit, or perhaps even greatly, out of tune with your deepest wish, with your deepest impulse, with your deepest, if you like, tendency towards true living and true behavior. So San has got this sort of reflection of the past dimension about it, and then Ge has got the connotation of kind of resolution to live more skillfully in the future, to live more in harmony with your deepest wish, to live more truly, more authentically. And so Sangai is this ongoing process, really, of learning from the past, living more skillfully in the future. Now, sometimes people take this the wrong way. Sangai is not about judgment, okay? It's not about never being good enough. It's not about a sort of an eternal non-arrival, that whatever I do, things aren't going to get, I'm not going to be ultimately perfect, and so my practice is fruitless. Not at all. I think a good way to think about Sangai and this ongoing process of Sangai is to go right back to some of the early teachings of the Buddha. He liked to talk about the 3 trainings. The training in concentration, the training in wisdom, and the training in sila, or behavior. The training in concentration. Apparently, according to the Buddha's teachings, we can train the mind. We can train the ability to focus to the point where we reach an end. There is no greater focus or concentration that the mind is able to actually kind of develop. The training in wisdom, the training in, if you like, clear seeing, in perceiving the reality of things. This also can be trained to an end point. We can reach an ultimate there. And then there's the training in sila, or behavior. You could view it as living out the truths of this concentration and wisdom, actually living the truth of that. And the Buddha said that that training in sila, that training in behavior, that training in living our truth can never be completed. Even a Buddha is continuing along this road. There's no end to the refinement that your life can actually undergo. Does that mean you're in some sense not good enough or a bad person? Well, there's no sense that the Buddha seemed to have any of that within his expression that I can detect. So I don't think we need to either. But we can learn to live on an ongoing basis more and more and more skillfully, more and more harmoniously, more and more beautifully. And rather than that being a journey of not being good enough, I think it's perhaps much more appropriate to think of it as a journey of development, a journey of growth, a journey of, ever-increasing beauty. Perhaps like a musician never stops. If they're a true musician, never stops learning, never stops growing, never stops developing their skill, their artistry. The artistry of your life is really what Sangai is about. So there are some dimensions perhaps to think about when you're considering formally committing to taking the precepts and becoming a Zen Buddhist.